All right, y'all. It's Dr. Manny St. Victor. As usual, I'm with board certified hypnotist Paul Ramsey, and today we're talking about this is actually one of my favorite topics, conversational hypnosis.
This
So,
is this is a good topic. It is. It's the topic that gets people a little scared, but also gets people very curious.
yep. And knowing is half the battle. Awareness is
Right.
the best weapon, really.
Yep.
Um, so let's dive right into it. What is conversational hypnosis?
Conversational hypnosis is also referred to, excuse me, is also referred to as Ericksonian hypnosis. Because Milton Erickson is widely considered to be the creator of the conversational hypnosis style. So some people call it Ericksonian hypnosis. Some people also call it covert hypnosis. And we'll come back to that toward the end of this session. I'm not a big fan of that term. I'm not a big fan of that sort of subgenre because I feel like it gets co-opted. But we'll talk about that more in a little while. Erickson is, in a lot of circles, considered the greatest American hypnotist. Some people would tend to go more, maybe they might say Dave Ellman was, some people might say Gil Boyne was, and they do have significant followings, those two men who have, all of these men have passed away, but Erickson has a lot of people pulling for him, and definitely deserves to be in that sort of top three group. He he grew up in the early 1900s. He got polio when he was a child. It limited his mobility, and as a result, he spent a lot of time sitting still watching people. And so if you think sort of like Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers, how these sorts of factors come together and shape your own development.
Yeah.
So here's a kid who really can't move, can't play with other kids. He ends up spending a lot of time sitting and watching people. And he's a very bright child. And so he doesn't just watch sort of disinterestedly. He's really watching and analyzing everything he sees. And he becomes really quite extraordinary as his life progresses at noticing things that most of us would never notice. Body language cues, breathing cues, subtle voice tone changes, all these kinds of things. Um, he gets interested in psychology. He becomes a doctor, and he gets polio again. He gets polio a second time.
Is that what resulted in his arm injury, or was it the first time? Like,
Yeah, I think the arm injury was the second time. I'm not totally sure, but I think it was the second time that it really hurt his arm, and it also affected his vocal cords. His voice, he had sort of like almost like a tiny partial paralysis of his vocal cords, so his voice got quite strange. And that's part of what makes it interesting is so many people, we've talked over and over again about expectation, about what people expect to be a good hypnotic experience. Most people expect to be spoken to in a soothing, calming, relaxing voice, and his voice was none of those things, and yet he was an incredibly successful hypnotist. And it was largely because of his ability to use what he knew about people cues to get them into state.
yep. Now
So
let me,
go ahead.
um, and hopefully I'm not like putting the cart right before the horse, but one of the main things I think I remember him changing, and correct me if I read the too short version of him, but is that he went from sort of the commanding approach to a more permissive approach where he opened it up to suggestions.
Right. And so, I mean, not only did he sort of shape the permissive movement in a lot of ways, he went so much in that permissive direction that he really would have sometimes where he would talk with people where people weren't aware at all that he was doing anything purposefully to get them into hypnosis. Hence the idea of conversational hypnosis. He was just talking with people. And in talking with people, he would have a purposeful way in which he'd use his tone, or he might leave a sentence hanging.
Yep.
You know, he would do those kinds of things so that it created emphasis, focus, shaped energy. He also would, again, he was really big on breathing. A lot of the stuff I've read about him, he used to really he would purposefully breathe, and he would watch people's breathing in their chest, and he would watch their chest as he was talking to them sometimes, and get his rhythm for his talking to match their in-breath and their out-breath, kind of. And he would do all these things that no one else was really doing, and he would just get people to slip into trance. And then once he had them in trance, he was really good at building metaphors and creating metaphors, symbology systems that people could just sort of grasp without having to try. Yeah. And they would take these symbol systems, and they would just sort of intuitively know, I'm the tomato bush, and you know, like, this is the tool, and I need to prune, you know. And sometimes his stuff would have a literal finished product. So like, there are like some really crazy stories, but they're very fascinating. Like he would have people who would come to his office, he'd be talking with them, and the next thing they knew, they were out in his backyard pruning his rose bushes, and they didn't know why.
Yeah.
You know?
I like that, dude.
Because he led them into state,
yeah,
built the suggestions conversationally, and then let them go.
Yeah.
And they just be out. So this stuff was, as it came out, and he published more and more books, and these stories, people told stories about their interactions with him. This is what led to, down the road, the covert hypnosis stuff. Was people were so impressed with his ability to shape behavior through just conversation that people started getting all of his published papers and all of his notes, and they were getting their hands on anything they could and deconstructing it all, and then trying to replicate it into these sort of influence programs. Yeah. And building these covert programs. And today it's still a pretty popular thing to sell these. They call them covert hypnosis, or some people brand them as black ops hypnosis. Yeah. And they're really trying to do this whole marketing thing of like, if you do my program, I can make you really powerful. You can get anything you want. You can have, you know, you can have all the sex you want. You can get a raise whenever you want. You can, you know, and selling this whole like, I can make you really powerful thing. Yeah. And I'm not a big fan of that. I don't think that's really an ethical use of these skills and tactics. And I also think those claims tend to be a little bit exaggerated. But Erickson was really, really great from everything I've read. I mean, I never met the man. But everything I've read, fantastic stories, and very dedicated to using what he had developed and what he had learned to helping people create change. And sometimes the way that he did that was very unusual, or even some people might use the word radical. His therapy, because he was a therapist, his therapy was really, really out there sometimes. I read a story once that, you know, sometimes he wouldn't even use hypnosis. I read this story where a man came to him who was a bedwetter, a grown adult man who was still a bedwetter, and he said, I need to stop this. I want to stop this. And Erickson said, I will agree to work with you if you promise to do everything I say without questioning me. Do we have that agreement? And the guy said, yeah, okay. I'm desperate. I'll do whatever you say. And he said, okay, here's what you're going to do. He says, you're going to go home tonight. He says, you're going to drink a lot of water, and you go through your normal routine to get ready for bed. He says, but then when you get in bed, I want you to wet the bed on purpose. And then go to sleep. And the guy said, what? Like, he was like, are you kidding? That's awful advice, you know? Like, and he said, hey, you said you do what I told you.
Yeah.
So you need to do this, or we're not working together. I'm not going to tell you the rest of it. And the guy said, no, okay, I'll do it. So the guy goes home and does it. And the next day he comes back in. And he says, what now? And he goes, all right. He says, I want you to go home, drink a lot of water, go to bed, wet the bed on purpose, and then sleep in it. And the guy's like, but I did. He's like, hey, you said, you agreed. And the guy has to go home and do it again, right?
Yeah.
He works him through this process where then, like, after like 2 or 3 times, that's it. Then he lets the guy just go to bed. And because the guy had to consciously do it to himself, he hated it so much that he wouldn't do it anymore, and he stopped wetting the bed.
Yeah.
And Erickson foresaw all that. You know, it's like so simple, but he saw it in a way that other people hadn't been able to see it. So it was those kinds of things. So we're talking about, first thing, observational skill.
Yeah.
Second thing, a wonderful problem solving, an ability to see the problem and parse it out into like, or chunk it down into what's really causing it, what's driving it, and say, okay, so what do you do about that? And then to be able to promote an approach to it that he could get people to do it. You know, he could get people. I think a lot of times people came when they were so desperate, so that they do anything. But so observational skill, something that we all can get better at. Maybe we'll never be as good as Erickson was, but watching body cues, body language cues, nonverbals, watching breathing, learning to watch breathing when people get tight or when they finally sigh and relax, things like that, and learning how to get used to those cues and say, okay, now it's time for me to offer a change because they're changing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And
tell me about mirror neurons.
Yeah. So mirror neurons, I'll tell you the study that they had. I don't remember the scientist's name because it wasn't useful information, but in his lab he had a monkey, and he had the electrodes kind of tied up where he can see the monkey's premotor cortex, I think it was, the part of your brain that kind of happens to signal when you're about to move, and when you move it fires off. So at one point the monkey was watching him eat a banana, and then the monkey's premotor cortex went off, you know, although the monkey wasn't moving his arms. And so much more research later, we come to realize that what happens is, and we simulate the things that we see, if it is someone with whom we're like, we have rapport with, if we resonate with that person.
Right.
You know? And there's also other elements of over-imitation, like kids, when they're learning, they over-imitate, and learning to do something while you do it decreases the over-imitation, where they only imitate the parts that lead to the goal.
Oh. Yeah.
So that is important because it goes back to the use of your attention to learn something by observing it correctly. Okay. So that's where the mirror neurons come into play.
Okay. So Erickson, way back, started figuring this stuff out in an intuitive way, and what he figured out is if he literally mirrored you, you would start to get in rapport with him. So when he would sit with a client, if the client took a certain posture, he would mirror that posture so that there was an alignment between him and the client. If the client took a big sigh, a few moments later, he would take a big sigh. And he would create entrainment, basically, right? So there's mirroring and matching. Mirroring physical position and spacing, matching movements, breathing, and tone. And it's like getting in the groove together. It's entrainment, right? So then he learned how to do that until he knew he was at a point when he had that entrainment, he had that rapport. Then he would stop matching and he would start leading.
Okay.
So once he was locked in and he had it, then he would test by changing his position and waiting to see if the client within a few moments changed to match the position. And if they did, then he knew they were in the groove. And then that was the beginning of trance for him. He's like, okay, we're grooved, we have agreement, we have rapport, we can go. And then he would start leading them, you know, further through the process, and he would get them into state. And a lot of the stuff that I've read, that he cared a lot about breathing. Like he talked, and he said he talked about what great observers children are, and how he admired the learning states of children. And he said he talked with a 3-year-old once, who he's like, I talked with a 3-year-old once that was smarter than just about any doctor I've ever worked with, and she simply She simply said to me, "You breathe people asleep."
Mhm.
And he said a 3-year-old noticed it and told him that, you know? He said, that's all it is. He said you match the breath, you pace the breathing, and eventually people go.
Yep.
But we live in a culture today where people don't really want to spend that much time. They have a hard time focusing, you know? So it's more challenging than ever for people to do that. So Erickson developed a lot of these early on things: matching, pacing, leading, um, breath techniques, the importance of observation. I mean, right down to little things. There's a pretty famous story about him where he had a woman come to see him who he had known outside of the office somehow, and or had worked with before, but then she didn't come in for quite a while, and she was married. But when she came to him this next time, he noticed that her wedding ring wasn't on anymore. And so as he spoke with her, he could tell that she was very like nervous and resistant, and somehow he connected all the dots in his head that the problem she had come to him before somehow connected to anxiety about having her marriage fail. And so all he did while he was talking to her conversationally was he had rolled up a piece of paper and he just took it and tapped it. He was talking and he just casually tapped it against the wedding ring, and she picked up on it, his wedding ring, and he said something like, "I understand what this is all about," as he like tapped it, and she subconsciously registered that he understood, and boom, like everything sort of clicked in place, and she did great. She went into hypnosis, and it's, you know, there's a more detailed story than that, but my point is focusing on how he would notice such little things as that, and then just give a simple cue, and he could create change in people. So very, very powerful stuff. Tons of books out there on Erickson and his methods. Not always the sexiest read, but if you really want to get deeper into hypnosis, that might be something to start looking at. He worked for a long time with a doctor named Rossi, and Rossi wrote a lot of the books. He would interview Erickson, and then he would write the book. So you might find Rossi's work to be the stuff really to read. But you just want to make sure that it's a book he wrote about Erickson and not some other book that he wrote, because he did write a lot of books.
Rossi did some digging into some of the polyvagal theory stuff as well.
I was wondering about that because of the whole heart breathing, the 3-letter. What is it?
The heart breathing.
Yeah, the
heart rate variability.
Yeah, heart rate variability. Yeah.
That's the key. If your heart rate variability is low to a certain point, then you're able to go into the sort of your social brain is working. You're not in fight or flight, and that's right. The point. And it takes a certain amount of trust to bring the anxiety down, and that's the point at which you can watch someone closely enough where you decide that this is someone who is of the same tribe as you, of the same identity reference group.
Yeah.
And then your mirror neurons tend to kick in a very specific way and they call it affiliation intention, where your brain starts mimicking the signal it perceives from the person, trying to tune up together, like two lightning bugs kind of flashing, and after a while they sync up. Yeah. So what happens is, in that dynamic, then at one point, someone will be the dominant in that, and with the pacing, with the leading, the dominant can start change the pace, and the other person's brain will follow in the signal. That's sort of the whole concept of getting compliance through hypnosis.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, for people who are watching this, again, all of these videos we're doing are intended to sort of be an introduction to hypnosis. I mean, there are people who have dedicated their whole careers just to Ericksonian hypnosis. So, I mean, it's something that I think if you want to follow it because it's really, really intriguing to you, by all means do, but just understand that it's a pretty deep and detailed subgenre of hypnosis. So it's something you'd have to really commit to doing a lot of reading and practicing around. Which is a nice segue to sort of the next thing that came from all that is neuro-linguistic programming.
Bandler.
Richard Bandler, John Grinder took a lot of what they had learned from Erickson's work and developed their own approach to, it's not hypnosis. They created their own sort of genre of personal change work, and they call it neuro-linguistic programming. They took what they knew about linguistics and what they knew about neurology, and they took what they knew about Erickson's work, and they went deeper with it. And what they really did was they defined the modalities that we operate on, sensory based. You know, we have our five senses, and then they went deeper from there and identified the submodalities that enrich our perception of our modalities. And they started analyzing how people process information in different ways. Some people are primary visual processors, some people are primary auditory processors, and some people are primary kinesthetic. They're real feelers. Well, then within those would be modalities. Then within those modalities, you have all the qualities that can be observed, which give those modalities like sense, basically, right? So you have, if you're a visual person, you've got light and dark, you've got focused or unfocused, you've got black and white or color. Like, you think about all the different ways in which you actually perceive visually. All those smaller qualities are submodalities. So some people, it's like probably for most folks, the classic thing would be, do you dream in black or white or color? Right? People are used to having that conversation with friends. That would be assessing what your submodalities are when you dream. You can do that with like all your stuff. Like, you start thinking about like, if you're an auditory person, volume level, tone, rhythms. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on. You can do it with smell. You can do it with feeling, you know, hot or cold, dull or sharp, right? So you get all this stuff. So what they started doing was looking at how all of these things come together to form the ways that people make meaning. How they talk about themselves, how they talk about the world. And they started figuring out how they could use that understanding conversationally, just talking to people. No formal trance, no inductions, just we're going to talk. And as we talk, I'm going to ask you questions that elicit an understanding of how you process information. And I'm going to figure out what your images or models are. They're big on models. And then say, okay, is it a healthy model or is it an unhealthy model, which is the concept of, is there ecology? You know, you want there to be ecology, a sustainable model.
Okay.
And if there isn't ecology, then the job for the NLP practitioner is to help you develop a better model that has ecology. And so, again, it's all done through talking. Now, there's some exercises, there's some exercises where, you know, you might get up and move sometimes to create a physiological change in feeling, because body language stuff matters, right? Like when you see people celebrate at the Olympics when they win, what do? They throw up, right? Like they throw up and they get big, the hands up and the eyes up, and they've studied all that stuff. And we all know body language. When you're sad, the head's down, the eyes are down. You know, you either get small or you get big, and there's different things like that. So they were studying all that stuff and then figuring out how they could leverage it to create state changes in clients, get them to think differently, get them to feel differently, and create different outcomes. But ultimately, that was pretty much done by just talking, right? Like they were talking through that process. So that's NLP in like the most oversimplified explanation ever. Because again, there are professionals who that's all they do is study NLP. So, you know, we're trying to just intro people to the concept. But that came forward from there.
I want a quick anchor in there. There's a really good book for the curious called Louder Than Words. And it's How the Mind Makes Meaning, I think is the full name of the book. And in that book, they go through the different what's called event-related potentials, which are your brain firing a signal saying, I understand. And I think it's the N400 and the P300. It's the time in your brain when you make the meaning after you see something. Now, they've gone through and done all the where and what pathways in the brain, and the people who do auditory meaning making, as well as what they call embodied situated simulation, where you can watch someone's brain with the EEG, the machine, the electroencephalogram, and see whether they're imagining something from the first person point of view, whether they're imagining it from the dissociated point of view, whether they're running through it, whether they imagine themselves having been in the car or like next to the car, because they take longer to do certain things.
Right.
So a lot of the stuff that a lot of the old school guys figured out intuitively, we now have the ERPs and the EEGs to substantiate it.
Nice. Nice. It's fascinating stuff. It really is. I've watched some really cool NLP demonstrations before where I've seen people who have a phobia, and an NLP practitioner will take them and in 5 minutes work them through and make that phobia just melt away just by getting them to change their submodalities, and so that they don't click into the, you know, they have an immediate reaction. I see the snake has a, by seeing it, it brings up a feeling in the mind and a picture in the mind of what my fear of the snake really is and everything, and they take them through and just alter the perspective, you know, on that snake, and it's just gone. Like, you know, it's really, really crazy. It's really cool.
Yeah, I've heard some similar stuff with and I'll give the brief version of helping people. One of the things that is often left behind from childhood is inner voices, like automatic negative thoughts from maybe a parent that was a bit abusive or a bit critical. And one of the techniques that they use is that they have you take the sound that you hear, make it as loud as possible, then imagine it getting really quieter, and then again as loud as possible, and then as it's getting quieter, also imagine it getting slower. Now, what that does is it takes the sound through your entire mapping cortex at different frequencies, so that you're able to get rid of a possible bad sound that you have that's subliminal because you don't hear it at the frequency anymore, but your brain is processing it as a negative message. So they found it to be effective. It's kind of cool.
I've seen people do another version of that, man. Is I've seen people do, they have people bring up the voice. They say bring up the voice if it's like a disapproving parent or even your own inner voice. They say bring it up, bring it up. Do you have it? Yep. All right, now take that voice, let it keep saying the same thing, but turn it into Mickey Mouse's voice. And by just changing the tone, the person can't take it seriously anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, you can't have Mickey Mouse telling you that you're a loser. Like it's just not the right voice. Yeah. And they go, but it's your voice. It's saying what you say, right? Yeah. And they're like, but do you feel the same? And they're like, no, I can't. They start laughing. They're like, I can't take it seriously. Just little things like that. I know it doesn't work for everyone, but some people can do. You know, that's the stuff that's really cool. It's worth exploring. It's neat.
Yeah. And I think the main thing about that is the power of the words and what they do in your head. That's the power of the conversation. When you're listening to someone, there's a lot that can happen during the listening and thought process. Yeah. Now, I think that's probably a good time to transition into thinking about the ethics of covert, or am I too early?
Yeah, no, we've covered all the rest of it pretty nicely. So, you know, covert programs, and this is more, you know, sort of like a caveat emptor to the viewers of this video. Like, you know, as you start searching for stuff, you'll find, like I said, you'll find covert hypnosis programs, you'll find black ops hypnosis programs, and I just would urge you to be really careful in your examination of those programs if it comes down to you actually thinking about buying someone's program. There may be some well-intended covert hypnosis programs that want to really teach you conversational techniques, but they feel like they need to spice up the marketing in order to get you to give it a try. You know, so maybe the marketing is sort of sexy, but the content is actually intended to help you and stuff. So I try to be open-minded, but I've just seen a lot of programs that are trying to create the sense that if you learn this stuff, if you learn my quick and easy program, you know, that, like I said, you can have all the sex you want, or you can get a raise whenever you want, or that kind of stuff. And then it's really framed in like giving you strategies for just being able to bend people to your will. Now, these strategies, they can make you more influential. You know, they can give you sort of an increased edge when it comes to being influential. But, you know, again, this is hypnosis. This is not black magic. This is not voodoo. Like, you can't just, you know, control people. You know, like, it's just not, it's not ethical. Like, if you're gonna use influence skills, you should be doing it to make people's lives better, you know, make their lives better, not to just get benefit for yourself.
Yeah.
I'm all for programs that will make you more confident, that will make you more genuinely assertive, that will make you stick up for yourself and stuff like that. But I just think, you know, I don't want to support programs that are about manipulating people.
And
We all have times when we want to be more influential, right? Like, and that's part of life, and that's okay. But that needs to be done within an ethical framework. And so, I just wanted to have a little time to just put that out there and say, like, if you get interested in the Ericksonian stuff or the NLP stuff, awesome. Like, learn about it, use it, and make your life better. That's great. If you're out there searching and you find these other programs, just be careful and really think twice about getting into a program that is, you know, trying to do that other not so cool stuff.
Yeah. And also an added caveat is you can destroy your reputation like that, because first of all, the more people you're doing this those approaches on, the more likely you are to have multiple people in a conversation who are conscious in different channels and noticing what you're doing, because people are conscious at different levels to different signals. So if you have 5 people in a room and you're manipulating one guy over here and it's working, there's another person who is hearing loud and clear what you, because you read it in some cheapy book, think is subliminal messaging.
Yeah.
What you're doing is you're signaling in a channel that that person doesn't hear, and it's influencing them. But this guy is seeing your signal all
It
over.
goes back to what we talked about before, Manny, with the mirroring and the pacing. You know, we talked about Erickson doing that to create rapport, right? So even if you just want to be like, I want to have more rapport with people, and you start trying to do it, but you don't do it well, you will creep people out. Like, you will lose people. Not only will you not get more rapport, you will actually lose rapport. There's this feeling when someone's mirroring you and they're doing it too obviously.
Too close,
Yeah. You start to be like, what the hell is this person doing? You know, like, and it's just a weird vibe.
Yeah, and I'll give an example of that, because the goal is rapport. If you've ever met someone and you've noticed that they're finishing your sentences, but it's not quite what you wanted to say, or it's coming out a little bit where you find yourself changing your cadence to notice them talking at the same time as you were saying your sentences, almost like they're following you, that's an example of mirroring gone bad. Because you're like, that's weird. And then you try to end your sentences differently just to see, and then you realize they're moving with you there too, and it's like, bizarre.
And it's uncomfortable. You know, and that's, I mean, if you want to get into this stuff, you want to get it right so you can have richer relationships with people. You want to get it right so you can make people feel more comfortable so that they'll share an experience with you, or, you know, that you'll just do good things. So, yeah, it's definitely worth putting the time in and doing the reading on and learning, and maybe even taking a class or something like that. It's not something that you should just be dabbling with and sort of like freaking people out with. So. That's it for me, man. Do we have any questions from the online folks?
Let's see.
Nope. Quiet crowd tonight. All right.
Cool. Thank you. I'm Dr. Manny St. Victor.
I'm Paul Ramsey.
All right. Good night, y'all. Take care.
See ya.